Good morning and good afternoon, good evening if you're joining us from Asia Pac. Thanks again for joining us again this week. This is Laura McNeil, Master Examiner for Sterling. Welcome to the 7th of 11 sessions of our Sterling Core Values Leadership Series. Each of the 11 sessions in this series is designed to highlight one of the Sterling core values in a 7-minute leadership brief, followed by a Q&A session. The core values are the basic elements of how we go about doing our work. They are the practices we use or should be using every day in everything we do. Today's core value is Management by Fact, featuring Dr. Samson Golston, professor in the Industrial and Systems Engineering and Engineering Management Department at the University of Alabama. Before I turn this over to Dr. Golston for a 7-minute leadership brief, I just want to remind everyone, please submit questions through chat. We do tee them up for discussion after the briefing. So this time, I'd like to introduce Dr. Samson Golston.
Thank you, Dr. McNeil. Thank you for the introduction and welcome everybody to the 7th Management by Fact of the Core Values concepts. Again, I'm Sam Golston. My background is applied statistics, which kind of aligns with management by fact, being able to take the data, do analysis, turn it into information that helps to drive the decision-making fact. So management by fact, which is the one we'll focus on today, is the core value that's really how we're using the data and the analysis to help drive that decision-making process. So it's kind of embedded throughout the criteria and definitely in the results, that whole process there, and we'll talk about that as we go forward. So management by fact. So if you think of management by fact, is really one of the hot items in the press or in organizations today. It comes in the terms of data analytics, business intelligence, artificial intelligence, machine learning. All of those are techniques, in my opinion, where we're trying to take the data and wring as much information as possible from that data to drive our decision making, or in this case, we can manage based on what the data is telling us there. So our actions will be based off of facts and experience. When you combine those two, I believe that's when you get the best decision making, hopefully with the best possible outcomes there. So for any organization, if you think of organizational performance, there are 3 questions that Baldrige and Sterling help you answer. That is, how well are we doing? How do you know? And then what do we need to do to get better? So if you just pause for a second and think of your organization and ask yourself those 3 questions, how well is the organization doing? You know, can we answer that question in one breath or less? If we can, that means we've really spent some time to identify those organization performance measures and what analysis we need to do to make sure we know how well we're performing. And then what do we need to do to get better? So what actions do we need to take based off of this analysis such that we can put our organization toward higher performance? So it supports the strategic planning or strategic objectives to make sure that our action plans are helping us achieve that strategic plan. Also, it helps us to compare ourselves with our competitors and know how well we're doing in the marketplace. So being able to measure and analyze organization performance, i.e. the management by fact, is becoming more and more important. And organizations are putting more and more resources toward this particular fact here, which is management by fact. So if you think of performance measurement and management by fact, a lot of the measures of customer, product, and process performance. So in today's time, when you think of data, organizations normally in 2 positions. Either they have too much data or they don't have enough data, right? So in the case where you have too much data, our Sterling model uses the term key. What are those key performance indicators, right? Where key means normally 4 to 5, maybe 6 key performance measures in a particular area that really drive at the performance of those processes or the performance of that department or organization. So it takes some time to develop what those key measures are, and we learn it over time. In the case where we don't have enough data, the question is, what data do we need? What measures of performance do we need to collect such that we can start to answer those three questions that we talked about how well are we doing in a particular area? Then there's other problems like who's going to collect the data, how we're going to store it, and how we're going to analyze it. Again, that takes some effort there for the organization to put forth to determine what those measures used to be. So the selection and use of those performance indicators is very important for us to be able to make sure we're meeting those customer expectations. So from that comprehensive list, we have to narrow that down to those key indicators that are tied to those requirements, those organization performance requirements. And then we may need measures and indicators support making decisions in a rapidly changing environment. When COVID comes along now, our thought process is, what's going to happen tomorrow? And how does our indicators help us make those decisions? As Anthony talked about, make them agile in that situation. Analyze the data for your tracking of processes. Again, we'll talk about that in more detail a little later. But the first evaluation factor of approaches or processes, how do we evaluate whether those processes are meeting requirements? So how do we evaluate those measures? So I show this slide to show that measurement analysis and knowledge management, that category, along with those core values here, are kind of the foundation here, and management by fact, along with measurement analysis and knowledge management, is really supporting each one of those other categories there. As we make decisions in those categories and results there, we got to make sure we have robust processes and approaches that address how we're going to collect the data, of course, how we're going to make sure that data is accurate data, quality data, and reliable. Then how we're going to analyze that data, those key performance measures there, and use that analysis to build knowledge that'll aid in our decision-making process. So if we think about this quick example here, let's assume that you are the manager of this particular area or a manager in this area, and you've got this data. Maybe you had the data for a week, and you've got a meeting coming up in 2 hours. But of course, due to your busy schedule, you really haven't had time to look at the data, to analyze it. So you take it out an hour before the meeting, and you look there, and let's assume that you're the manager over the mental health department. So all of a sudden you look at the mental health department and you notice that you're 30.3% over budget, right? So now you may start to panic a little bit because you believe in the meeting. Your boss may ask you for a rationale why you 30% over budget, which that seems to be, if I compare that with the other differences, it seems to be out of line with what other departments are seeing. So you may start to rationalize in your mind, okay, what is the reason for this 30% over budget? Is it staffing, or other issues that may have caused that? And you try to rationalize and make rational decisions about that numerical comparison based on the fact that we just looked at that particular number. But if you understand how to analyze the data and how to use that management by fact, because we want to take an action off of that, right? And a lot of times our actions are incorrect based off our interpretation of that particular variability. First thing, we'll recognize that everything is going to have some random variation. There's going to be variation in all of our processes. The point being, where is that variation wide enough for me to take action on that process? So Dr. Deming talked about an important concept, which is the voice of the process. So in Dr. Edward Deming's teaching, he teaches us to understand that voice of the process. And by understanding the voice of the process, it will help managers know when to take the appropriate actions on those processes for process improvement, or when we should just leave the process as operating because that's a normal variation or random variation within that process. So the appropriate thing for the manager to do, or for you to do in this situation, is to use a simple chart, which is called a control chart, which will help us understand that random variation or that common cause variation is inherent in every process in which we should not act on the process when there's only random variation, because, and it's hard for some managers to understand, when we react to that random variation, we're actually making the process worse than if we would just leave that process operating, because we're increasing the variation by making adjustments on that process. But the control chart here, it helps us identify where there's an assignable cause or a root cause to that variation. And then we can go and identify what that root cause is and improve that process by understanding. So if you see the plot here, the mental health expenditure, we see that the -30 there, which I think occurred in April, it falls within our random variation or our normal limits here. So it's from a assignable cause standpoint, there's no reason why, or we expected that variation within this process. So there's no reason for us to have to explain that random variation. It's just due to this process, that's a normal cause of what we see within that random variation. So if you think of the voice of the process and then understanding the voice of that process, this will allow us to make better or take better actions based on our analysis of the data. So if we think of achieving the management by fact culture, the main thing that we want to focus on there is that the approach or the processes there, right? The people at all levels must focus on the processes. And then the measurement of those processes will let us understand how much, what the performance is, so we can take the appropriate action. And the business analytics and the AI and machine learning, as we said before, it's becoming more and more popular today. You know, even on Saturdays, if we're watching the football game, you know, we can't make it to halftime until we hear the announcers talking about the analytics, the business analytics. So even football coaches are using the data to help aid them in their decision-making process as they manage or call plays in the game. So same thing for managers and organizations. If we have the right data analytics, so to speak, then we can use those analytics to aid us in the decision making. And that last bullet there, we can translate that measurement into the appropriate action, right? So the appropriate actions means based off of what we've learned in our analysis, we are taking the appropriate action. So that don't mean we'll always make the correct decision. We should be able to make more informed decisions, and then we can build contingency plans in cases where there's still high risk based on our analysis. So management by fact, to sum it up, really means understanding our processes and then having key measures that let us know how well we're performing in those processes. And then based on our experience, we're able to build that experience level to where we can take the appropriate actions based off of that knowledge.
All right. I'm sorry.
So I was just gonna say, any questions or discussion?
Yeah, we can open it up for questions. So Dr. Goldstein, that was very insightful. Thank you for that. I'm going to go ahead and summarize. I've written down some bullets here, and you can tell me if I've got it right or if we need to make some minor adjustments. So first bullet, use data analytics to drive organizational decision-making by focusing on a balance of not too little and not too much data. Use performance measures to identify how well the organization is performing against strategic initiatives and priorities. Third bullet would be identify 4 to 5 key indicators to ensure we know what is important to us as members of the organization. Make sure to interpret the voice of the process by considering assignable causes and normal variation. And you cited Edwards Deming in this one. Okay, and then the last one I wrote was strive for a management by fact culture to translate measurement to appropriate action. Now we do have a question teed up, so I'll go to that one in chat. It's in your experience, what are some recommendations for an organization to move from predictive data to prescriptive data, from insight to foresight?
Wow, that's a good question. That's from a high performing organization because you're already predicting. So that next step would be to be able to tell what's going to happen in the future. So in your data analytics tools, you're using regression. You know, if it's a manufacturing process, I would say we're using designed experiments to figure out, you know, which one of those factors are driving our response or our key performance measures, and then to be able to prescribe what levels of those factors will give us the output that we want. So your analysis probably going from regression to more of a design and analysis of experiment where we systematically can manipulate those variables to see their impact on our key performance indicators.
Okay, very good. We'll do one more. We're right at time. How can I tell that I am making management decisions based on the right set of facts?
So in that case, again, that for high performing organizations, that's normally years and years of using key performance indicators and comparing it and refining those measures. I was gonna, Dr. McNeil, chime in on your first point there about those measures and the number of measurements for people just starting, organizations just starting on their journey for performance excellence. It's difficult a lot of times, and they get bogged down in what are those key performance indicators, and then how do we, I guess, validate those measures to say, these are the measures we need to pay attention to. They're related to our customer requirements and our market segment. If we do well or improve these metrics, then our overall organization performance will improve. So identifying those is somewhat trial and error, and it happens over time as we get more and more understanding of our organization and more mature with respect to performance excellence and their performance excellence model.